Hello everyone, this is Alex Ipatov and this is the sixth video of the series on Rook Endgames. In this video I'm going to talk about the H-pawn basics. In the first example, we're going to take a look at the position when the pawn has reached the 7th rank and the king of the stronger side is on the promotion square, on A8 in this case. As we can see, one file is not enough to win. For example, Rook H7, King C8, Rook H2, with the idea Rook C2 check. Black can simply play Rook C1, and as we can see, the white king will never be able to make out of the prison on A8. Black's defensive plan is quite simple, just wait on the squares King C7, King C8, King C7, King C8. So one file, in this case B file, is not enough. Let's take a look at another example. So in this example, the opponent's king is cut off on two files, on B and C file, but this is also not enough to win. Our only chance to win for white is to bring the rook over to B8 and kick the opponent's rook away from B1, and then move our king away from A8 by playing King A8, King B7. So when you try to play Rook H3 with the idea Rook H8, Rook B8, Black simply goes back to C7 and transposes to the first example. And now the opponent's king is only cut off on one file, and as we already know, it's not enough to win. If white plays Rook H8, then Black simply waits. Rook B8, simply Rook C2, check, King C8. And Black simply waits with the king on squares C7, C8, or with the rook on the C file. And if white plays Rook C3 check, then Black simply plays King D7. And as we already know, the white's only plan to win is to bring the rook over to B8. And it's only possible by leaving the rook from C file, thus enabling Black to go back to C file with his king. Now let's take a look at another example. In this example, the opponent's king is cut off on 3 files, but it's still a draw, because white's only plan to win is to bring the rook over to B8 and then go out with the king from A8 and try to promote the pawn. However, this plan is too slow. White plays Rook H3 with the idea Rook H8, Rook B8, but Black's king is just in time to make it to C7. Rook H8, King C7, Rook B8, and we already know this position. This is a draw. It was the first position of this video, and white cannot improve the position. Black simply waits with the king on squares C7, C8, and with the rook on C file or on B file. So remember that 3 files is also not enough to win. Now let's take a look at the position where the opponent's king is cut off on 4 files. So in this position, the opponent's king is cut off on 4 files, B file, C file, D file, and E file. And now it's a win. Our plan is the same, bring the rook over to B8 and get our king out of A8. So white plays Rook H3, King E7, Rook H8. And although this position is winning for white, Black can still put some traps. For example, by playing King D6. King D7 is even easier for white because white wins by playing Rook B8, kicking the opponent's rook from B file. The next move would be King B7. So Rook A1, King B7, threatening A8 queen. Black checks, Rook King A6, check, King B6, check, and King C5, and white wins. The king is out of the checking zone and white promotes the queen. So King D7 does not put resistance, but King D6 indeed does. So we continue with Rook B8, because if we don't play Rook B8, then Black would play King C7, and that would be theoretical draw, as we already know. So King D6, Rook B8, Rook A1, we play King B7, we threaten to play A8 queen, so Black has to check, and now we play King C8. If we play King A6, then we can't make a progress because Black has Rook A1 check, King B6, Rook B1 check, and we don't have a C5 square in our possession because it's controlled by the Black's king from D6. If king a5, then rook a1 check, and we don't have anything better than go back to b6. Rook b1 check, king a6, and we can get this position with king on c8. So after rook b1 check, we have to play king c8, not king a6. Now we threaten a8 queen. So once again, black doesn't have time to wait, so he has to check, rook c1 check, king d8, and now black plays rook h1. Now we cannot play a8 queen, because black would mate us in one move, rook h8 mate. So that's why we play rook b6 check. First we kick the opponent's king away from the 6th rank, king c5. Black king attacks our rook. We don't have time to play a8 queen because rook h8 check, and it's a draw. So what can we do? Because if rook a6, then it's also a draw, because black has time for rook h8 check, and the rook is on the long side, and there are too many files between the rook and the king, and sooner or later the white king will be thrown away from the pawn. If king c7, then simply check, check. The king cannot go to a6, so it has to go somewhere. It can go to the 6th rank as well, because then rook h6 check, and black wins the rook and the game. So the king has to go to e8, then check, king f7, and rook e8, and that's a draw. The next move would be king b5, and then after rook a1, king b6, and black would eliminate the a pawn. So rook a6 leads to a draw, but white has a very cute move, rook c6, which leads to a win. So please remember about this idea. Rook c6. Now black cannot take on c6 because a8 queen would be with check, winning the rook, and it's an easy win. And if black plays some other move like king b5, then white simply plays rook c8, threatening a8 queen. If rook h8, then king c7, check, and king b8. Rook king b6 and queen, and white wins. So please remember that when the opponent's king is cut off on 4 files, it's enough to win. The winning plan is to bring the rook over to b8, let our king out of a8, and try to promote our passed pawn into a queen. The opponent's best defending resource is the following. Is to play king d6, and after king b7 to start checking. We can't go to a6 because of constant checks on a1 and b1, so king c8 is only move to try to play for a win. Then rook c1, this, and rook h1. So this is black's best defense, but it also can be taken down by checking on b6, this, and rook c6 check, which is a very cute and very important check, which wins the game. That was the video about the AH pawn basics. It was Alex Ipatov, and thank you for watching.